Chapter 13. Computers and the Internet, From the Mainframe to Facebook. If the automobile had followed the same development as the computer, a Rolls-Royce would today cost $100 and get 1,000,000 miles per gallon, and explode once a year, killing everyone inside. Robert X. Cringely, InfoWorld Magazine. Introduction. The improvement in the performance of computers relative to their price has been continuous and exponential since 1960, and the rate of improvement dwarfs any precedent in the history of technology. The wonders achieved by computers and, since the mid-1990s, by the Internet, have misled many analysts into believing that the current rate of economy-wide progress is the fastest in human history and will become even more rapid in the future. The basic flaw in this faith in an acceleration of technological change is that even if the contribution of computers to economic growth were increasing, the share of total GDP represented by computers is too small to overcome the great majority of economic activity, where the pace of innovation is not accelerating and, indeed, in many aspects, is slowing down. ICT is the standard acronym for Information and Communication Technology, and the share of total spending by business firms and households on ICT hardware and software, including internet and phone connection charges, amounted to only 7% of the economy in 2014. Even if the performance-to-price ratio of ICT equipment were to rise by 20% per year, a hypothetical zero rate of progress in the other 93% of the economy would yield a growth rate of overall economic performance of only 1.4% per year. The magical advance of computer technology over the past half-century discussed in this chapter is even more impressive than the advances in entertainment and communication discussed in Chapter 12. This contrasts with the slowing pace of innovation discussed in Chapter 10 on food, clothing, housing, and appliances, and in Chapter 11 regarding surface and air transportation. The chapter begins with the mainframe computer, which allowed the computerization of many routine and tedious business operations as long ago as 1960. The first bank statements, telephone bills, and insurance policies were produced by mainframes in the 1960s, and airline reservations systems were gradually automated in the 1960s and 1970s. The tedious typing and retyping of legal briefs and book manuscripts was eliminated in the 1960s and 1970s by the memory typewriter. Electronics made possible the modern copying machine, and the Xerox company became one of the hot corporations of the 1960s. At the same time as the personal computer arrived in the early 1980s, two other fundamental innovations were made in the form of the ATM cash machine and the retail barcode scanner. In the beginning of the 1980s, the personal computer became accessible with software choices that enhanced personal productivity, including word-wrapped word processing, spreadsheet calculations, and gaming. Academics, authors, and others whose jobs involved writing and manuscript preparation flocked to the personal computer. Long before the arrival of the Internet, computers within business firms were connected with T1 lines that operated at broadband speeds, and so within the firm, the New York office could send messages and trade files with the San Francisco or London office as early as the 1980s. The rise of the Internet utterly transformed the role of the PC for individuals by allowing it to communicate with the outside world, just as communication inside business firms had been possible for most of the previous decade. Academics began sending emails in the early 1980s, and e-commerce and web searches began with the Netscape web browser in 1994. With the quick reach that the Internet provided to the general public for information, communication, and entertainment, a new era began for professionals and ordinary citizens alike. Just as electricity and indoor plumbing networked American homes, Chapter 4, the Internet networked the American people. Search engines enabled people to find the cheapest airline tickets, and the weather in Savannah next Saturday. Just as cheaper telephone calls had made letter writing obsolete by the early 1970s, so email began to encroach on the previous centrality of telephone calls as a means of communication. Increasingly, news did not come from newspapers tossed onto our porches, or from the nightly TV news, but from online versions of traditional news media and from new forms of information called blogs. The rise of the internet and the computer also opened the market for e-commerce. Large superstores such as Walmart became gigantic consumers of data, which allowed them to predict sales from historical trends, as well as to undercut the prices of their competitors. Amazon was founded in 1994 and gradually over the past 2 decades has developed into an e-commerce juggernaut that put many small independent bookstores out of business, and then ultimately crushed the bricks and mortar's giant Borders. Consumers have benefited from e-commerce in many ways. For instance, by being able to find menus on the websites of all but the smallest restaurants, and to make airline, hotel, and restaurant reservations electronically without having their phone calls placed on hold. The chapter concludes by comparing the familiar benefits of the internet with its costs, some of which are subtle. There still remains a gap in internet access and, more important, internet literacy that can add to the shortfall of educational achievement of the minority and poverty population. The internet has brought with it a set of concerns that did not exist 20 years ago, including hacking, identity theft, privacy, internet bullying, and, in the views of some other observers, a decline of attention spans and literacy, especially among American teenage boys. Another set of problems has to do with the payoff of investments in modern technology. Elementary and secondary schools have made large investments in ICT without any evident improvement in test scores. Colleges spend vast sums on smart classrooms that require ubiquitous hand-holding by support staff without any apparent benefit to educational outcomes. Beyond the classroom, families have increasingly turned from personal to electronic communication, and young children are obtaining access to electronic devices. For adults, the constant connection to their smartphones, email, and social media means increased levels of multitasking and hyperconnectivity, both of which may hinder productivity and even create danger in the form of texting while driving. The Technological Revolution and the Death of Moore's Law. In the early 1970s, Seymour Cray, known as the father of the supercomputer, was turning heads in the computer industry. The Cray-1 system was a supercomputer that held a world record speed of 160 million floating point operations per second and had an 8-megabyte main memory. The computer had no wires that were longer than 4 feet, and it could fit in a small room. In 1976, the Los Alamos National Laboratory bought the Cray-1 system for $8.8 million, or $36.9 million in today's inflation-adjusted dollars. The sharp contrast between the Cray-1 and today's most ordinary laptops represents progress so rapid that it is hard to grasp. In mid-August 2014, the Walmart website offered for $449 a Lenovo laptop with 6 gigabytes of memory, or 750 times the memory of the Cray-1, and the ability to do 1,000 times as many calculations per second as the Cray-1. Beyond speed and memory, other benefits of the everyday laptop over the fastest computer in the world in 1976 include being able to watch video, access the internet, and communicate with people halfway across the world on a system that can fit on the lap without the burden of an industrial-grade cooling system. Leaving aside the increased connectivity, the sheer increase in computing power represented an increase in the performance-to-price ratio of the Lenovo, compared to the Cray at an outstanding annual rate of 44% per year. And yet this increase has been vastly understated in the U.S. national income accounts. despite its use of a hedonic price index for computers, because, with one exception hereafter discussed, research on computer prices has overlooked the necessity of directly comparing mainframe and PC prices. And yet, it is trivial to calculate that the price of the computing power contained in the Cray of $8.8 million fell to 60 cents between 1976 and 2014. The technology industry is unique in the rapid growth that it has achieved since 1960 in the performance-to-price ratio of the products it has produced. The classic description of the uniqueness of technical advance in the computer industry is provided by Moore's Law, set out a half-century ago by Gordon Moore, a co-founder of Intel. His long-term projection was a doubling of chip density every 2 years. The number of transistors incorporated in a chip will approximately double every 24 months. This converts to an annual growth rate of 34.7%. Almost as fast as our calculation of the transition from the Cray supercomputer to the Lenovo laptop. Moore's Law is a misnomer, it being rather a conjecture that semiconductor producers subsequently adopted as an industry standard. Figure 13.1 summarizes the evolution of Moore's Law, starting with the 1971 Intel 4004 with 3,500 transistors, and ending with the 2014 Intel 15-core Xeon Ivy Bridge with 4.31 billion transistors. The chart shows how remarkably close the transistor count stays to the Moore's Law trend line. However, estimates of the rate of improvement of computer quality based on memory and speed inherently underestimate the improved performance relative to price by failing to place any value on more advanced ways of accessing memory, flash drives versus floppy disks, more advanced input-output connectors, USB ports instead of serial and parallel ports, shorter boot times, better audio-video capability, and the enormous increase in portability and reduction in weight that have occurred since 1982. The earliest PC screens in 1982 were monochrome green and black, not full color, and the DOS interface required typing multiple commands instead of scrolling with a mouse, or more recently, using a touchscreen. William Nordhaus's research on the history of computer power over the past 2 centuries makes 2 important comments about the comparison of Moore's Law to growth in computational speed and cost. First, it is clear that rapid improvements in computational speed and cost predated Moore's forecast in 1965. For the period 1945 to 1980, cost per computation declined at 37% per year, as compared to 64% per year after 1980. Second, computational power actually grows more rapidly than Moore's Law would predict because computer performance is not identical to chip density. From 1982 to 2001, the rate of performance as measured by computer power grew 30% per year faster than Moore's Law would indicate. Nordhaus's estimate of a 64% per year decline in the performance-adjusted price of computers after 1980 conflicts with the price declines of roughly 20% per year for mainframes between 1957 and 1984, and in the range of 20% to 30% for personal computers after 1984. Part of the discrepancy is that Nordhaus has quantified the sharp step downward in the price-performance ratio embedded in the transition from mainframes to PCs, just as we have done in our comparison of the Cray mainframe with the Lenovo laptop. Whatever the reasons for the differences between our Cray-Lenovo annual rate of price reduction of 41% and Nordhaus's estimate of 64%, there is no doubt that computer prices have declined more quickly than those for any other product in the history of invention. However, Figure 13.1 also contains startling evidence that Moore's Law has finally suffered a major slowdown below its historic 34.7% growth rate. If we look closely at the relationship between the dots and the straight line, We notice that the dots are above the line in the late 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s, but then decline to below the Moore's Law line thereafter. We can calculate that the Moore's Law line rises on average since 1970 at 34.7% per year. This speeded up to 60.1% per year during the period 1997 to 2006, and then fell by a factor of almost 6 to 11.5% for 2006 to 2014. The sharp speed-up and then collapse of the Moore's Law growth line is shown clearly in Figure 13.2. The growth rate of the dots in Figure 13.1 can be calculated and plotted as a centered 5-year moving average. The Moore's Law line is horizontal at the traditional Moore's Law growth rate of 34.7% per year. The actual outcome has differed sharply on both the upside and the downside. Instead of doubling every 2 years during the go-go period of 1997 to 2006, the doubling interval dropped to 14 months. But since 2006, the doubling time tripled from the traditional 2 years to 6 years. Why did the growth rate in Figure 13.2 jump in the late 1990s and collapse after 2006? In email correspondence, the distinguished economist Hal Varian, now the chief economist at Google, explained that technological change in desktop and laptop computers has come to a halt because no one needs a super-fast chip on their desktop. So research has shifted into trying to improve larger computers in data centers as well as battery life of portable devices. He concludes, "The most important issue is whether the slowdown is a demand-side or supply-side phenomenon. My view is that it is demand-side." He goes on to cite a prophetic 2002 article titled, "The Lives and Death of Moore's Law." The rest of this chapter asks how well this gusher of computer performance, at least the part that happened before 2006, was translated into what matters: the growth of real GDP per hour and per capita, and the creation of consumer surplus not captured by real GDP. We postpone until Chapter 17 the implications of the remarkable slowdown of the past decade and its implications for future productivity growth, with the slowdown in the operation of Moore's Law joining a list of other evidence that diminishing returns have set in. Figure 13.3 plots the share of 3 different forms of ICT spending in GDP. The largest share is ICT investment by business firms. The smaller categories are 2 types of consumer spending, that on audio, visual, photo, and information processing equipment, and the consumer service components of Internet and telecommunications services. This is where the monthly landline and smartphone bills are tabulated. Business investment in ICT exhibits 2 periods of rapid growth, from 1975 to 1984, and, after a short hiatus, from 1991 to 2000. These 2 periods of quick growth are followed by slow growth during 1985 to 95 and negative growth during 2000 to 2005. The top line in Figure 13.3 is the total of business and consumer spending and has the same pattern of peak in 2000 and then decline as the business component. Bigger is better: mainframes and early networks. On February 15, 1946, the New York Times published an article titled, "Electronic Computer Flashes Answers, May Speed Engineering." The War Department scientists at the University of Pennsylvania revealed one of World War II's top secrets: an amazing machine which applies electronic speeds to mathematical tasks hitherto too difficult and cumbersome for solution. The ENIAC, or Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, computed mathematical problems 1,000 times faster than ever before and had not a single moving mechanical part, but weighed 30 short tons, took up 1,800 square feet, consumed 175 kilowatts of power, and had several miles of wires. Impressed with the size of this colossus, some joked that when the ENIAC was turned on, the lights in Philadelphia dimmed. Airline passenger traffic exploded with double-digit growth after the end of World War II, but flight booking was done entirely by hand. As early as 1946, American Airlines started working with the Teleregister to develop the Reservisor, which could handle an additional 200 passengers daily with 20 fewer agents. By 1956, a larger and faster version could process 2,000 reservations a day and cut response times to half a second. But the process was not fully electronic, requiring punch cards for each reservation. American Airlines leaped ahead of the other airlines and developed a fully electronic system that became fully operational in 1964. Sabre supported more than 1,000 terminals from two IBM 7090 computers and could process 83,000 daily phone calls. Unlike the Reservisor, the system took over all booking functions and did not require any use of punch cards. The life insurance industry needed to handle large volumes of data, and electromechanical punched card tabulating equipment was already a staple in the industry, dating back to the 1930s. An IBM assessment noted, insurance companies were among the largest and most sophisticated users of punched card machines in the late 1940s and 1950s. During the Second World War, many insurance actuaries and other employees worked for the military in projects involving statistics, code breaking, bomb sites, and operations research. This is one of many examples emphasized in Chapter 16 of the spillover of technologies developed under wartime conditions to raise productivity in the post-war economy. The large life insurance companies in 1954 to 55 rushed to buy the first commercially available computer, the UNIVAC 1. Progress was slow because the initial computers did little more than juggle data read from punch cards and printed by punch card printers. The banking industry went through 3 phases of electronic evolution, involving the use of the mainframe computer, the development of credit cards, and the early ATM cash machines. As early as 1934, IBM had introduced the IBM 801 bank-proof machine, which listed and separated checks, endorsed them, and then recorded their totals. It represented a milestone in the history of check clearing. By the 1960s, the typical bank system consisted of an IBM 1401 computer, which could receive data from either punched cards or a magnetic character reader. Tellers could now locate customer information, process it, and print the results within seconds at each teller window. One of the first 1401-based banking systems was installed at the Pacific National Bank in Seattle in August 1961, and the bank increased its checking account update speed from 3 checks per minute to 75. Credit cards created an entirely new form of payment. The legend goes that the financier, Frank McNamara, was entertaining clients at Major's Cabin Grill in 1949. The stereotypical New York power lunch was embarrassingly brought to halt when the bill arrived, and McNamara realized that he had left his wallet in a different suit. He had to call his wife to bring over money to pay the tab. Suitably embarrassed, McNamara began working with his lawyer, Ralph Schneider, and friend and retail store magnate, Alfred Bloomingdale, to create a multi-purpose charge card. A year later, they started Diners Club, the first charge card company, with a network of 27 restaurants. However, the Bank AmeriCard, established in 1958, quickly became the most popular credit card, and in 1976 was renamed Visa. The modern-day VisaNet system, as of 2012, is connected to 200 countries or territories, 15,000 financial institutions, 2 million ATMs, millions of merchant outlets, 2 billion cards, and 68 billion transactions per year. Despite the benefits that IBM processing systems brought to banks and the ease that credit cards made to payments, customers could make deposits and withdraw cash only during specified bank hours. The idea of the modern networked automated teller machine, ATM, was conceived by a former IBM engineer, Donald Wetzel. There were two main barriers that Wetzel had to overcome to convince banks to adopt the ATM: costs and acceptance. Wetzel recounts, "The mentality of people at the time was, remember, we want to deal face-to-face with people. People are not going to walk up to a machine and use it. In fact, we don't want them to do that. We want them coming to the bank and talking to us, because then we can sell them on some other things." The inherent benefits of an ATM were customer-based. It decreased the time required for a transaction and offered the convenience of being available for use 24/7. In time, the ATM evolved from a novelty that banks advertised to a service that consumers took for granted. The mainframe, which often occupied an entire air-conditioned room or even a separate building, contrasted in size with the miniature barcode. After several decades of trial and error in development, on June 26, 1974, Sharon Buchan scanned the 67-cent price of a 10-pack of Wrigley's Juicy Fruit gum using a laser scanner. The first time an item was scanned and sold using the Universal Product Code, UPC. Despite the technology being available by the mid-1970s, barcode adoption was slow. In 1977, around 200 stores in the United States had scanning facilities. Acceptance involved the usual chicken-egg dilemma that new products experience. Few items were UPC registered, and another barrier was the $133,000 price of a scanning system for a retail store with 10 checkout lanes. In 1976, a Businessweek headline grimly described the supermarket scanner that failed. However, by 1980, scanners had improved in quality, the price had decreased exponentially, and an estimated 90% of grocery products had UPC registration. The computer revolution goes to work and then comes home. The popularization of photocopying occurred at the same time as the mainframe computer became viable, as the Xerox 914 photocopier was unveiled to the public in 1959. This 650-pound behemoth could print an astounding 100,000 copies a month, but needed a carpenter just to uncrate it, a specific employee to operate it, its own 20-amp electric circuit, and a wary eye to make sure that it did not overheat. The machine had an unfortunate tendency to catch on fire if it got too hot. The machine launched Xerox as one of the hottest companies of the 1960s and 1970s, and the Model 914, which had a 17-year production run, was labeled by Fortune as the most successful product ever marketed in America measured by its return on investment. Other than by using a mainframe, in the 1960s the basic task of multiplication and division could be performed only two ways, either crudely by a slide rule or precisely on a Marchant calculator that would take several seconds, and it went clunk-clunk to obtain the precise value. We wonder today at the mechanical calculations necessary to produce the great classics of economic research. For example, John Kendrick's 1961 magisterial volume of output and productivity data, which remains the primary source of what happened on the supply side of the economy before 1929. The world changed instantly in 1970 when, for a pittance, one could buy an electronic calculator. Instantly, not just the Marchant machine but the slide rule were rendered obsolete. The typewriter is a device that may be found today in a museum or in the home of a nostalgic writer, but it was still the universal tool of commerce in the 1970s. The addition of memory to the electric typewriter starting in the 1960s dramatically changed the process of writing and eliminated tedious retyping of manuscripts. Though the term word processor is commonly associated with modern software such as Microsoft Word, the rudimentary concept is a device that can record, edit, and play back keystrokes. In 1964, the first word processor, the IBM Magnetic Tape Selectic Typewriter, IBM MT-ST, was introduced. This meant that it could record text typed on a roll of magnetic tape and allowed individuals automatically to reproduce previous documents. For a brief period, the transition from the mainframe and memory typewriter to the personal computer was bridged by word processing mini-computers. Wang Laboratories became famous for its production of word processing machines. The 1200 word processor connected a Wang mini-computer to an IBM Selectric typewriter and allowed storage of text and offered many features to edit text, including inserting text, deleting text, and skipping the characters and lines. The individualized Wang Office Information System, introduced in 1976, had a screen and was an affordable office machine that was quickly adopted by law firms, educational services, and other businesses. The catalyst that sparked the personal computer revolution was the Altair computer released in 1975 by Micro Instrumentation and Telemetry Systems, MITS. The system was not very exciting for anyone except for hobbyists and collectors, for it featured neither keyboard nor screen, and its only output was flashing lights. The most significant part of the Altair was that MITS hired 2 students to adapt the basic programming language for the Altair. These were Paul Allen, a recent Washington State University dropout, and Bill Gates, who would use his Altair money to drop out of Harvard. In April 1975, they together founded Microsoft. A month earlier, another computer legend, Steve Wozniak, had attended the Homebrew Computer Club in California and was immediately inspired by what he saw. He began work on his own personal computer, the Apple Computer, or the Apple I, and got his friend, Steve Jobs, to help with the sales. The computer had more memory and a cheaper microprocessor than the Altair, and could be plugged into any television to use as a screen. Soon Jobs and Wozniak began work on the Apple II, which included a keyboard and a color screen, as well as an external cassette tape, soon replaced with floppy disks. It was IBM's first personal computer, PC, introduced in 1981, that revolutionized the market, and soon made the Wang mini-computer and the memory typewriter obsolete. It broke 2 long-standing IBM traditions by using other companies' products in the computer hardware, the Intel 8088 chip, and incorporating an operating system made by Microsoft rather than by IBM. Another break from IBM tradition was that rather than keeping the design secret, IBM released its specifications to the public, so that independent software developers could design programs to run it. Sales were initially expected to be 250,000 units in 5 years. In less than 4 years, 1 million had been sold. The earliest PCs let loose a torrent of feverish development of software, with each new version making the previous version obsolete. Lotus 1-2-3 was the leading spreadsheet software of the 1980s. And WordPerfect was the leading word processing software. So rapidly were new versions of WordPerfect released that by 1992, only a decade into the PC era, it reached version 6.0. PCs quickly appeared on the desks of virtually everyone in the business world, and in an increasing number of homes, particularly those of authors, academics, designers, and a host of other professionals. As the decade of the 1990s began, the world had the hardware and software to become connected through the internet. Instant communication through email came first, and the world had only a few years to wait before the first widely used web browser brought the world to every desktop and laptop PC. From the internet revolution to the social revolution. The beginnings of the internet mirrored the creation of the computer. Much like the ENIAC computer system, the Internet's origins began with the U.S. military. Though ideas and concepts of a globally connected network emerged throughout the 1950s, the ARPANET team, composed of 24 engineers and scientists, emerged from the Pentagon's Advanced Research Projects Agency in 1969. ARPANET was built to link distant computers so that multiple individuals could share time on a single mainframe computer. Later that same year, ARPANET facilitated the first successful computer link between UCLA and Stanford Research Institute. By 1971, there were more than 20 connected sites, or nodes. While online services, such as Prodigy, CompuServe, and America Online arose in the 1980s, where users used telephones to connect to a central system that dispensed electronic information, these systems were rudimentary precursors to the modern World Wide Web, owing to the small amount of information shared, the limited number of simultaneous users, and the inability to handle large amounts of traffic. Long before the arrival of web browsers, email was used not just in offices, but by individuals accessing the internet using telephone dial-up lines to services such as AOL.com. Employees of companies could often access the internet through an email account hosted by their employer, as many of my academic colleagues and I did beginning in the late 1980s. From its inception, email had extraordinary power because it combined instant communication with the ability to include documents and other information as attachments. In December 1991, the first server in the United States was installed at the Stanford Linear Accelerator System, and the World Wide Web became accessible. The first browser was released at the same time. In September 1993, the National Center for Supercomputing Applications released Mosaic, which quickly came to dominate other web browsers and was soon dubbed the killer app of the Internet. However, if any year can be anointed as the beginning of the Internet revolution, it is 1995. The introduction of Windows 95 was a sensation, creating long lines of eager buyers waiting for hours in front of stores that would sell it before the doors opened on August 24, 1995. This version of Windows represented the transitional moment in the history of the Internet, in that Microsoft's Internet Explorer, a web browser derived from Mosaic, was available as an add-on to Windows 95. As an excited observer wrote, "The Internet is slow, superficial, chaotic, nerdy, hostile, and largely a waste of time. You just gotta try it." Figure 13.4 uses U.S. Census data to display the adoption of the PC and Internet in American households. The initial PC adoption rate is noticeably slower than that of the Internet, taking 13 years to reach 30%, in contrast to the mere 7 years after the release of Mosaic for Internet use to reach 30%. By historical standards, adoption of the PC and the Internet was somewhat slower than of television, which had required only the 5 years between 1950 and 1955 to go from 5% to 65% ownership. From today's perspective, the Internet of 1995 was extremely limited, and indeed almost useless, except for email. On the early web browsers, you could see pictures of Paris or London, but you couldn't make a hotel reservation or plan a trip. You could hear only snippets of a song or movie, not the entire thing. Access from offices was through relatively fast T1 lines, but access to the Internet from home or from hotel rooms could be made only via dial-up services, which were slow and quirky. Figure 13.5 displays the percentage of households with dial-up and broadband access, and shows that broadband access by 2005 had surpassed dial-up, which has by now almost disappeared. Today, we routinely book airline and hotel reservations on the web and choose restaurants by reading reviews on TripAdvisor and other travel sites. The website Trivago offers to compare hotel prices on 217 booking sites at once. Pandora and Spotify create services on which we can not only listen to music, but also find songs of similar genre and style. Netflix offers suggestions for streamed movies, and Amazon examines our past purchases and tries to get us to purchase 10 books in addition to the one we are planning to purchase. Wikipedia is our modern-day gigantic encyclopedia, which, if published in print, would require 2,052 volumes to house the 4.6 million articles in the English language, and double that to include articles in all of the 270 available languages. No longer is a desktop or laptop PC required to access the world, for a pocket-sized smartphone can do the same with the extra convenience of a touchscreen and innumerable apps. College students can keep up via Facebook with their friends from high school. A hashtag on Twitter can spark a revolution. No longer can governments censor the ideas obtained by their citizens, although some, as in China, are still trying. Though email continues to be indispensable for the many people whose jobs depend on exchanging files and web links, gradually, email has been replaced for communication by social media and social networking. The former creates social interaction among people in which they share or exchange information and ideas in virtual communities and networks. Social networking is narrower, a platform to build relations among people who share interests, activities, or background. For instance, YouTube is largely a social media website on which the primary purpose is to view videos. LinkedIn is largely a social networking service or online social network, for its primary purpose is to help people connect with others in related businesses or fields of study. LinkedIn has become a worldwide network of business cards and has become a primary way for people, particularly young adults beginning their careers, to find and change jobs. Facebook, Google+, and Twitter combine aspects of both to create multi-platform websites. Almost by definition, the attraction of any social media site depends on how many users there are. If 90% of the people with whom you interact speak English, and only 10% speak French, then it is quite likely that you will work harder to perfect your English than your French. Thus, the power of social media is determined by the popularity of the platform. In 2005, only 8% of adults said they used social media. A service called MySpace was then the leading social media network, and Facebook, created by Mark Zuckerberg in his Harvard dorm room, was still only a year old. 8 years later, in 2013, social media use in adults has reached 72%. Teenagers and young adults had an adoption rate of close to 90%. Many business interactions still remain focused on email, but social networks dominate personal interactions. E-commerce. The Amazon Revolution. The e-commerce revolution in retailing has created both incalculable benefits for consumers and unmitigated pain and bankruptcy for some types of traditional retailers in categories in which the essence of a purchase is to be able to choose easily among a wide range of possible options. Amazon, founded in 1994, initially sold books. Although a half-decade elapsed before it became the dominant merchant of books, the appeal of its concept was immediate. Traditional book retailing in 1994 consisted of two types of booksellers. The large, nationwide chain stores, for instance, Barnes & Noble, Borders, and Walden Books, had hundreds of branches. Supplementing the large chains were small, specialized bookshops. Small bookstores allowed customers to visit an entire store devoted to, say, cookbooks or mystery novels, or even comic books. Because only the largest cities could support these specialists, it was often necessary for customers to travel long distances to reach them. But for most of the population, they were unnecessary, because one of the large chains was around the corner. Amazon stepped into this environment in 1994, and immediately the benefits of its revolution became clear. Soon it became possible to search for any book by author, title, or subject category. Soon the software became more sophisticated, as each user would have an account, That provided Amazon with the history of previous purchases. If a customer had previously shown a preference for a particular type of mystery novel, then on the Amazon search stream would appear 8 or 10 illustrated book covers of that type of mystery novel under the heading, "You Might Also Like." Soon the availability of any type of book became so appealing that many, and eventually most, book customers stopped going to bookstores. By 2003, my neighborhood highbrow specialized shop, Great Expectations, closed for good. And in 2011, the large nationwide chain Borders declared bankruptcy and closed all its stores, as had Walden Books several years earlier. If all it sold was books, Amazon would have changed retailing forever. But the imagination of its founder, Jeff Bezos, went far beyond that. He soon realized that he could sell anything. Today, Amazon sells 232 million products to a user base just in the United States of 244 million customers, defined as those who have purchased anything within the past 12 months. The basic concept of customer loyalty was not lost on Amazon, and it figured out how to build customer loyalty by providing a unique benefit. Founded in 2005, Amazon Prime costs $99 per year, and it provides an irresistible lure by eliminating the only disadvantage of mail-order services, the cost of shipping. Amazon Prime customers are entitled to unlimited free shipping, guaranteed to arrive 2 days after an order is placed. There are now 20 million Prime members, and they spend twice as much per year as other Amazon customers. The Amazon revolution has brought selection, convenience, and free shipping to millions of customers, but it has created problems in its wake beyond the bankruptcy of Borders and specialized bookstores. Through most of Amazon's history, it charged no sales tax, implying that states and localities have been deprived of billions of dollars of sales tax revenues. As a longer-term effect, by reducing the demand for all types of merchandise in brick-and-mortar retail stores, it has weakened the economy by creating an excess supply of space in retail shopping malls. In the future, there will be fewer jobs for construction workers building new shopping malls, and fewer jobs for clerks, stocking staff, and managers at retail stores. We return to this theme in Chapter 17 as we explore the central theme of this book, the ever-growing set of forces that are slowing American economic growth to a crawl. Conclusion. Achievements of the computer revolution thus far extend from the first commercial mainframe, the UNIVAC 1, introduced in 1954, to the iPhone 6, introduced in September 2014. The rapid development of computing technology has brought together not just new ideas, but ultimately a complete change in how people communicate and obtain information. Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, provided one of the most accurate predictions in the history of science when he guessed in 1965 that the power of computer chips would double every 2 years. The pace accelerated to doubling every 16 months during the late 1990s, but since 2006 has slowed to doubling every 4 to 6 years. Moore's law died because there was no demand for the engineering expense necessary for it to continue. Existing chips are powerful enough to perform all required functions on desktop and laptop computers. The computer revolution began in the 1960s and 1970s with mainframe computers, which were so large that they often filled an entire room and required a separate custom-built source of air conditioning. The early computers allowed telephone bills to be created automatically, eliminating telephone operators as phone calls began to be switched electronically, made possible ATM cash machines that replaced many bank teller jobs, and allowed airlines to handle an upsurge in traffic while eliminating the tedious manual task of making and keeping track of reservations. Computers did not have to be large to make a difference. In 1970, the handheld electronic calculator was invented. eliminating overnight both the mechanical calculator and the slide rule. In 1981, the mainframe computer went on a diet, shrinking in size from units that filled a room to a small box with a screen that would fit on any desk in the office or at home. Soon the typewriter became obsolete, for documents could be changed again and again without retyping. Any calculation could be done with a single formula applied to hundreds of thousands of numbers, thanks to the magic of electronic spreadsheets. Although the personal computer was initially perceived as a specialized tool mainly useful for computer hobbyists, statisticians, writers, and researchers, its appeal broadened to the entire population when web browsing was invented in the early 1990s. The World Wide Web gave individuals entirely new options to obtain information, communicate with one another, and make purchases without any need to travel to a store. Information became free, print encyclopedias became obsolete, and a few keystrokes in a search window could obtain any information in a second. For instance, the previous section of this chapter contains the impressive statistic that Amazon sells 232 million products. How did I know? I typed into the Google search box, "How many products does Amazon sell?" and the answer appeared on my computer screen in a fraction of a second. Communication has also been revolutionized. Long ago, telephone calls eliminated personal letters, and then email eliminated many types of telephone calls. Now communication is possible by many new options, including Facebook, Twitter, and Skype, which allows a soldier in Afghanistan to have daily video chats with his parents in Nevada. The benefits of the computer and the internet, though overwhelmingly positive, have begun to raise concerns about some side effects of the revolution. The first problem is the exacerbation of inequality. Lack of access to computers and the internet inside the home greatly handicap the efforts to succeed in school of students whose families live in poverty, for they are competing with the majority of students who have computers at home and who have parents who show how to use them. Internet illiteracy, the inability to navigate through this new source of learning and information, creates a handicap that can last a lifetime. Another less familiar problem is that we may be creating too much data. Ronald Coase, a University of Chicago economist who won the Nobel Prize, long ago warned that if you torture the data long enough, it will confess to anything. Information on the internet is bountiful and varied, but for all the valuable resources, there are flawed resources as well. At the level of students from elementary school to college, the internet makes possible internet bullying. The internet allows both good and bad ideas to travel around the world instantly. And the internet can not only create revolutions, like the Arab Spring, but also spread disillusionment and misleading information. There are other problems with the new world of constant connectivity. Teenagers, especially boys, have so much distraction available online that increasingly they have difficulty concentrating in school. Like anyone, instead of doing their homework, they can watch a YouTube video, check up on a friend's Facebook page, or play video games with friends. Psychologists worry that this early exposure to the internet can change human interaction, and school officials grow concerned about adopting technology without a strong positive effect on test scores and class engagement. The computing revolution has brought a new level of convenience, connectivity, and collaboration to at least 80% of the population. A farmer who has a smartphone today has better and faster access to a wide variety of information than a university professor did only 2 decades ago. As important as the computer and internet revolutions have been, the comparison of their benefits with those achieved between 1870 and 1970 creates an illuminating contrast to be developed subsequently in Chapter 17.
Please subscribe and press the bell icon to never miss another update. Please like, share and comment.